Hello and welcome to this edition of the North West Employers podcast. I'm Sharon, Senior Executive Director here, and today's topic is all about net zero. I'm delighted to welcome Mark Davies to join me this afternoon. Mark is the Chief Executive of Lancaster City Council and also the Lead Chief Executive for Net Zero here in the North West. So Mark, welcome and thank you so much for joining me. I know this is a topic that's really important to you, and I wonder if we could just start off by telling us a little bit about your leadership journey and actually when did you first start getting involved or interested in climate change and net zero?
Okay, so I think I've worked in local government for about 30 years now, 22 at Lancaster, 3 as Chief Exec, and then before that I was at Bolton Council. I suppose I took a non-traditional route into local government. When I first left school, I was a grounds maintenance contractor, so working on industrial estates and things like that, but I took a job during the winter months as a cleaner at a local school for Bolton Council, and at that time I was working alongside Vernon Kay, so that's quite interesting. But when I was working at a school, what really struck me was that I was cleaning the sixth form toilets and pulling blazers out of them, but in doing that I was contributing towards a broader system, so in this case the education system. So having a clean school meant that the pupils who went there could hopefully get better educational attainment. I was helping the teachers who were working there, and I was part of that sort of broader system. So as time went by, I progressed in local government, became a supervisor, and then Bolton Council invested in me, did a degree in business studies, and then got a job at Lancaster City Council where I was looking after things like waste and environmental type issues. In terms of my sort of connection with climate change, in no way am I an expert, but there are lots and lots of experts out there. And I suppose leadership is about getting the best experts together, identifying what the problems might be, understanding those, and arriving at solutions. But I would also say that whilst I'm not an expert, everybody who lives on this planet is part of either the problem or the solution. And you would argue that, well, not argue, you can see that humans, that certainly in the developed world, the balance has shifted towards humanity becoming part of, being a significant part of the problem. So it belongs, I guess, to each of us to try to sort of at least make things less worse, and hopefully do things in a very radical way so that we can leave the sort of world in a better state than how we've got it to so far. So although that sounds sort of very highfalutin, I think that that's very much my view, that I'm a public servant. I've got a responsibility to the people that I serve. That's what I'm here for.
Yeah, no, thank you, Mark, and obviously an interest from very early on in your career, and it's interesting. We'll see what Vernon Kay thinks of this now when he sees, that could have been me. But just something you touched upon there, and you said about that leadership role, and I guess we know that over 300 councils have declared a climate emergency, and I guess in terms of your role as a leader, or as leaders in this, what would you say are some of the key ingredients for effective leadership around the net zero agenda?
Yeah, so Lancaster City Council declared a climate emergency in 2019, and at that time I saw the declaration, and there's a number of points made in the way that council motions are written up, and my first thought was, this is all really, really good stuff, but how do you convert that to something that's practical and deliverable, and also something that makes a difference and resonates with, in our case, our 145,000 residents in Lancaster. So that was the sort of first challenge, to understand what was behind the motion, because it's political, obviously, in intent, quite ideological, but also very, very well intended and obviously hugely significant. So always with these things. The first thing is to understand, isn't it? So, we worked with the politicians to understand what the intent of the declaration was. Once we understood that, we then worked and spent a lot of time understanding, A, how we as a council were contributing directly particularly to CO2 emissions, and then B, how the district as a whole contributed to CO2 emissions and where the main contributors to that were from. And once you start doing that, you start to realise the enormity of the challenge. But in doing that, if you start to understand before sort of rushing out and doing sort of token things and doing things that look good but aren't going to mean a thing, putting all that effort into understanding was really worthwhile, and it's helped us get to the point that we have so far.
Great, and I think I know certainly in the early days, I think there was a lot of councils declaring it, and it was like, yeah, this is the thing to do. But then it's then so what, isn't it? And actually, like you say, bringing that to life, and I guess there's a real important point about everyone. You said it in your intro. Actually, it's everybody's responsibility. But there's a real need, I guess, to pull everything together, isn't there? So how do you, or how would you say the best way is of engaging kind of communities, residents, businesses, and how do you get them all on board to support this agenda?
Yeah, so I think probably an interesting way that I looked at this was I thought about I'm quite interested in canals, and there was something that was, we got a lot around this area in Manchester, but in the Netherlands in 1860 there was a sort of, they faced an existential crisis where obviously because the proximity to the sea and the low-lying land, there was a very real risk that the Netherlands would be enveloped by the sea. So they arrived at a solution, and that solution was to dig a canal network, a drainage network that would ensure that the Netherlands wouldn't disappear under the sea. And that canal network, I think it's the equivalent of 5,000 Suez canals. It's just absolutely huge, a canal that sort of stretches for 500 miles and 200 metres wide, something like that. And every single part of that was dug by hand. So it wasn't a case of, they could go out and get a load of machinery. Every part of it had to be dug individually, each and every sort of spadeful. And so the point there is that little steps, but a series of little steps, results in significant results. And, you start to think about how organised they had to be across the Netherlands to make sure that all those, sort of spadefuls all connected up. That sort of struck me that we shouldn't be put off by the enormity of the challenge, never ever be put off. So I think that part of, and the other point is that in order to do that, the Netherlands had to mobilise large parts of the population. Obviously they needed people to dig the canals. They needed to speak to landowners to get them to agree to have canals built through their, through their fields, things like that. So the same with us. We need to do something that sort of resonates with our communities. So engaging with communities, getting the narrative right, because there are obviously lots of people who really understand the issue of climate change. But then there are a lot of others who, because they've not been engaged with properly, because there are obviously lots of sort of interests that are contrary to climate change. There's a lot of propaganda out there. So engaging with communities, helping them see what the challenges are, helping people to appreciate the core benefits of addressing climate change, helping to see why it's a really important thing. That's absolutely essential. And certainly in Lancaster, we spent a lot of time engaging with communities. We had we set up a people's jury that was facilitated by Shared Futures CIC, and we set that right up the outset when we're in the understanding stage to get a view of what a cross-section of our community thought of this. And it was really interesting, the first few meetings, a real polarisation of views where some were, we need to get on with this, it's absolute emergency, and other people were saying, well, this is absolutely ridiculous, it's just sort of woke nonsense. But we've moved up. But after a few weeks, once the evidence was shown, we got experts from Lancaster University and across the world sort of looking at different aspects of the impacts of climate change and the science behind it. That polarisation stopped and people could see, well, yeah, I get it now, I get the science, I get the potential consequences, and I get that by addressing this, it's not just about sort of improving the environment, it's about the benefits that you get in terms of health, in terms of air quality, in terms of housing, in terms of better transport systems, in terms of food production. So that engagement, that journey, but just saying to people, well, you should believe in this because scientists say so, that's not going to get anybody anywhere, is it? You've got to take people on a journey.
I was going to say it's that hearts and minds kind of thing, isn't it? Because it's easy to say, oh yeah, it's somebody else's problem, but actually when you look at it and all of the other kind of that ripple effect and the impact it has, you start to then see, oh, actually there's something in this, I need to kind of get on board. And thinking about some of those solutions, and like I said, some of it is longer term, isn't it? But how do you go about kind of working with communities and trying to get some, I suppose, embedding it so it's not just seen as some quick fixes? It's like, what are some of the longer term solutions and more sustainable? Is there anything that you're doing currently in Lancaster or generally, do you think, around getting some of that, as I say, embedded so it becomes sustainable and it's not just a kind of a flash in the pan, is a quick fix for now?
Yeah, so I mean, a real tangible example is our leisure centre. So we've got one big leisure centre that serves the whole of the district, and we know, don't we, the financial challenges that leisure centres have faced. They were facing financial challenges during COVID, because of COVID, much bigger challenges, and yet leisure centres, particularly council-provided leisure centres, are really important because they're not just there to provide sort of sports activities, they're there to help reduce health inequalities, they're there as a really sort of vital community space. But still the challenge of how you get those to stack up financially is important, especially with the volatility in terms of energy prices, because swimming pools are a really expensive commodity to heat, and you've got to pay the bills, but then you get to a point where to cover the costs puts, the people just can't afford to be members or to come for swimming sessions. So we thought about that, and one thing that we thought about was we've got a leisure centre which is next to a former landfill site, which is still in the settling period because it take decades to settle. So it can't be built on, but it provides many acres of land, which actually is ideal for locating renewable energy installation. So in this case, we planned a solar farm, and what we did was put a direct wire from the solar farm to the leisure centre, changed the heating system, so previously been a gas heating system, to two big air source heat pumps, which are obviously powered by electricity. So now we've got a leisure centre that's got a swimming pool that's heated from the air source heat pumps, which in turn are powered by the Morecambe sunshine.
And plenty of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it means that we've got a control of costs. So we can, it's still a challenge to operate a leisure centre, but we're not in the same situation that some other areas are at, where we're having to think, well, the only way we can do this is by closing it. So you've got that, you've addressed the problem in terms of climate change, you've secured financially your energy costs, and you're providing a leisure centre that produces outcomes in terms of people's health and well-being and all those other really positive things that that our communities want from local government.
And I think that's a really good example. Thanks for sharing that, Mark, because I think that then, I guess it highlights, it's not just a standalone thing, this, is it? So you can't just have a policy here and leave it to run. It's that really embedding it and integrating it in all that we do. And just to move us on next, obviously with the new government, there's a real importance, or the emphasis on kind of resetting that relationship between central government and local government. And so from your perspective, what do you think local government can do to support some of the central government policies around net zero and climate change?
Yeah, so any government has got major challenges at this point in time, haven't they? And we know that some of the the government's looking at things like healthcare, it's looking at things like housing. We know that obviously it's looking at climate change, and the challenge for the governments is always how do you prioritise those things? Which has got a greater priority, dealing with the environment or dealing with health, and they're all things that are really close to people's hearts. And I suppose the argument that I would make, there's a famous quote about systems are set up perfectly to provide the outcomes that they provide at the moment. That's probably not quite the right quote, but you get the idea. So at the moment we've got, if we just address those things on a sort of subject by subject basis, we'll probably get much more of the same. So I think the challenge that I think we've got is that we need to look at not sort of climate change as a subject, but sort of systems change, because those things like sort of health and climate and housing are all inextricably linked anyway. So if you provide better housing with better insulation and better sort of planning standards, then you'll reduce the impact on the environment, but you'll also get, you'll also improve people's health if you sort of retrofit lots of the poorer quality, very old housing that we have in the country. Very expensive, but for the people who live in those houses, it would have huge health impacts, which at the moment tend to get dealt with when they become really acute health problems. So I think that from a local government point of view, there are some really practical things we can do. I've explained the leisure centre one, and that was provided with government funding. So we've got some practical things we can do, but we've also got our community leadership role, where we can start to look at how, at grassroots level, a bit like the people did in the Netherlands, you start to affect systems change, and you start to think about the core benefits of treating the environment respectfully on health. You start to think about invest in housing, not just sort of make profits out of housing, because that has a huge impact on health and it has a huge impact on climate change. So that idea of how local government can contribute to systems change, I think it's really, really important, and that's something we can help the government to deal with, because we're in that unique position where we understand our communities. We know how our communities are impacted, and again at a grassroots level we can start to set out what we feel the opportunities are at a local level, but also what the costs are of that, what the benefits are, and then government can start to decide how they, to convert that into policy and investment and all those other things, which again sounds very sort of grandiose, and it is. But if we don't deal with it, if people who are in leadership positions don't start to think in them terms, nothing's going to happen, and we let down not just the next generation, but we let down people who are living in coastal communities in 5 or 10 years' time, because sea levels are rising. So we've got to get on with it. It's an emergency.
And who better then to lead the North West Net Zero Network? So as your lead chief exec for that, aren't you, Mark? And I guess what would be helpful to understand a little bit more about your ambitions for that network, because I know it's relatively new. So What's your aim there? What are your ambitions for that network?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is it's a real privilege to be the lead chief executive for that network. And as I said before, I don't profess to have any of the answers or any of the expertise that's needed in this, but hopefully I've got that sort of leadership capacity and enthusiasm,
and the passion, yeah, definitely,
that to go with it. But the network has got some of the best people that you could ever possibly imagine to progress the Northwest in this area. So it consists of other sort of chief executives. It consists of elected members who have climate change in their portfolio. So you've got this political mandate there, which is obviously important. And it consists of climate change officers from many different councils throughout the Northwest, so from Cumbria right the way through to Cheshire. So, you know, that harnessing that amount of skills, knowledge and enthusiasm can only be a good thing. What we don't want it to be is something where people get together and network. Obviously, that's really important, and we all learn off each other. But what will give this an extra dimension is if we start to sort of articulate our position as a region, so this broad Northwest region, and set out what it is that, based on the understanding, knowledge, expertise we've got, what would it take to get the Northwest to net zero within a time frame that reflects the emergency of the situation? How much would that cost? How would we deliver it? We can set out that sort of broad strategic vision, and we can show to government that, you know, we're really organised in the Northwest. You know, there's a lot of talk about sort of devolution and things like that, which is great, but devolution is a process. It's a means to an end, but sometimes people get lost in the process. This is about sort of something broader than devolution. It's about the fact that we recognise that by working together, we can be a powerful force. We understand our communities. We've got the expertise. We've got really good partners in universities, academic institutions who can help provide that evidence. And we can do something in the Northwest that could be really spectacular and probably hasn't been done before on such a scale. You know, we've got some fantastic examples of other countries that have done it on a sort of council-wide footprint. So let's be really ambitious and shake things up a bit and change the system, and not just do things that we've always done in the same way but a little bit more, because that's not going to get us there. This is an emergency. You know, when COVID was on, that was an emergency. It was dealt with in a completely radical way, wasn't it? People stopped doing the day job, started to collaborate, started to work in different ways, and you know, we've got some really good positive outcomes from that. But the reason why it worked was because people had that focus, didn't they?
Yeah, definitely. And I think just to wrap up and kind of capture some of that enthusiasm and focus and ambition that you've got, what would be your kind of words of wisdom to anybody who's also supporting this agenda, the net zero, and any kind of top tips or words of wisdom for people just to end us out?
Yeah, I think we've got to be ambitious. I mean, I look at our council as a whole, and even if we get to net zero by 2030, which we will, we have less than 0.5% of an impact on all the CO2 emissions that are produced within our district. So there's a risk there that you think, well, what's the point? But doing a little is absolutely better than doing nothing. You know, think of each of those spadefuls at the canal network in the Netherlands. So the first thing is, don't be put off by doing a little. Second thing is, understand the challenge. So, as I said, across our council area, we spent a lot of time understanding where our CO2 emissions have come from. We've invested significantly now in local area energy plan, which sets out what our energy, where energy is produced at the moment, but where it will be required in the future, what capacity there is in the grid. So we've got an understanding now, not just for our activities of the council, but for the whole of the district. So that understanding is really, really important. I think the third thing is about having leadership needs to come from wherever it comes from, but there needs to be leadership. So you can't necessarily look to the people who are in hierarchical positions for leadership. The leaders out there might be people, it could be anybody in the organisation, it might be people in our communities, but that sort of coalition of the willing, pulling together people who got leadership in this area is really, really important. Fourth thing, engage with our communities, get the narrative right about climate change. It's part of a bigger system. Tackle climate change, you tackle health, you tackle housing, you tackle air quality, you improve the environment, you tackle food systems. That's what this is about. And I think the fifth thing is just get on with it. Stop talking about it. Just get on with things, understand things, and then make decisions and boldly get on with it. Otherwise, people just sit around sort of pontificating. Nothing happens. People get disillusioned. We've just got to get on with this one.
Great, thank you so much, Mark. Thank you. You got all fired up there. So huge thank you, Mark, for sharing those insights and just giving your take on it, and a really, really fascinating insight into kind of looking at the big picture really and how it all fits together. So huge thank you for joining us this afternoon. If you'd like to follow more of our podcasts, you can find them on our website, nwemployers.org.uk, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you very much.